My childhood house was torn down. But when the new owners reached out, they found a time capsule with my name on it, dated 20 years before I was born. I never expected to hear from anyone in Fairview, let alone a stranger claiming to have something of mine. I mean, I'd left that town behind almost 2 decades ago, carrying nothing but my mother's old suitcase, a few childhood belongings, and a head full of bitterness. So, when I opened my inbox that morning and saw the email from someone named Bram Collins, I thought it had to be spam. But the subject line grabbed me by the throat. "I think I have something of yours." At first, I thought maybe it was an old friend, or, more likely, someone who was just looking to dig up skeletons I'd rather stayed buried. But this email was oddly specific. Bram's words were polite, formal, almost like he was afraid to spook me. "Hello, Caspian. I'm reaching out because I recently purchased the Lovett property in Fairview, Pennsylvania. During renovations, we found a small item in the foundation with your name on it. If you're interested, I'd be happy to discuss it further." The Lovett property. My family's old house. The house where I spent my childhood before everything fell apart. And there was a photo attached, a rusty mint tin, scuffed and worn, with my name scratched onto it in shaky letters. But the strangest part? Right under my name was a date. July 7, 1963. It didn't make sense. I wasn't born until 1983, and I sure as hell didn't have any family mementos from 2 decades before I existed. And yet there it was, staring back at me, a time capsule I'd apparently inherited, long before it even been a twinkle in anyone's eye. I stared at the screen, feeling the years close in on me. It was like opening a window back into a life I'd spent years trying to forget. The house in Fairview, my mom, Elaine, her tired face in the glow of our dingy kitchen, wringing her hands every time she'd come back from running errands. The rumors that followed her, the stares we'd get in the grocery store, the whispers. "That's her. That's the woman who tricked a Lovett." My dad, Caspian Lovett Sr., died before I was born. I'd never known him. All I had were fragments, stories my mom would tell me when she thought I was too young to understand, and later, bits and pieces she shared, always with a sigh and a faraway look. And the Lovetts, my dad's family, despised her. They'd called her a gold digger, a liar, a thief of their sacred name. To them, I wasn't a Lovett. I was a stain. I can't count the number of times my mom told me how they'd cut her out after my dad passed away, shutting us out of the Lovett family legacy. "One day, people will know the truth, Caspian," she'd say, clutching my face like I was her whole world. "One day, they'll know who we are." But in Fairview, no one cared about the truth. They only cared about who held the power, and that wasn't us. By the time I was 16, things had reached a boiling point. Someone, I never knew who, claimed they'd seen my mom carrying on with another man right before I was born. Word spread fast, and before long, the whole town was buzzing with the rumor that I wasn't even my father's son. My mom tried to fight back, but how could one person stand up to an entire town? Especially when that town was in the Lovett's back pocket. They had money, influence, and family history going back generations. We had nothing. We left Fairview under a cloud of shame, and my mom took what little she had and moved us to Ohio. We barely scraped by, and over the years, her anger turned into exhaustion. She worked herself to the bone for me, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. When she passed away 2 years ago, I thought that chapter was closed. No more lies, no more shame. Just a quiet acceptance that I'd never know my father's side of the story, and I'd never know why the Lovetts had been so determined to push us out. And now, suddenly, there was this email. A stranger claiming he had something of mine from that very house. I clicked reply before I could second guess myself. "Hi Bram," I typed, fingers shaking slightly. "I'd like to know more about what you found." I wasn't prepared for how quickly he'd respond. The next day, Bram sent another email. This one had even more photos of the tin, including the inside, a small note, folded and yellowed with age, and a faded picture of a man standing in front of a vintage car. Bram wrote, "The note is addressed to my son, signed with the initials CL, and includes the name Hugo Barnes along with an address here in Fairview." Hugo Barnes. My dad's old lawyer. I remembered his name from overhearing bits and pieces when I was a kid. My mom never liked him, called him a snake in a suit, but she'd always said he was the Lovett's go-to guy. Seeing his name made me feel like I was being pulled back into a web I'd barely escaped from. I told Bram I'd be driving down to Fairview that weekend. The prospect of seeing that old house again, of confronting memories I'd spent years trying to bury, was both terrifying and magnetic. I had to know what was in that note. I arrived in Fairview on Saturday afternoon. The town looked almost the same, though the colors seemed faded, the buildings a little more run down. The Lovett family house was a sprawling old colonial with peeling paint, surrounded by an overgrown lawn that gave it an eerie, abandoned look. It seemed Bram was still in the thick of renovations. Tarps and scaffolding surrounded the structure, and a small crew worked on the front steps. Bram was waiting on the porch, a tall man with a friendly face and a weathered cap. He waved when he saw me, wiping his hands on his jeans before extending one to me. "Caspian, right? Good to meet you," he said, giving my hand a firm shake. "Yeah, that's me. Thanks for reaching out," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of nerves and anticipation. Bram nodded, gesturing toward the house. I figured it was the right thing to do. When I saw your name on that tin, I thought, what are the odds? I mean, you don't come across a name like Caspian every day. "Yeah," I laughed dryly, "believe me, I know." He led me into the house, navigating around stacks of wood and piles of dust-covered tools. I found the tin under the back wall, hidden in a little crawl space. My guess is someone didn't want it to be found. When I saw the date and those initials, I figured it might mean something to you. He handed me the tin, and I felt a chill run through me as I held it, the rusted metal cold against my fingers. I turned it over, staring at the etching of my name, the date, my father's initials. This tiny object, this little mint tin, felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I took a deep breath. "Do you mind if I take a look?" "Go ahead," Bram said, nodding. He took a few steps back, giving me space. With shaky hands, I opened the tin, carefully unfolding the note inside. The handwriting was elegant but slightly rushed, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry. I began to read, my eyes widening as I took in the words. "To my son, Caspian II, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But there are things I need you to know." The letter went on, explaining how my father had grown up in a family that prioritized wealth and reputation over everything else. How he'd been encouraged to marry a wealthy woman to secure the Lovett name. But when he met my mother, everything changed. "They tried to ruin us," the letter continued. "They tried to make me choose, tried to make me turn away from the only woman I've ever loved. But I couldn't. They told me I'd lose everything, but I didn't care. I chose her." Tears stung my eyes as I read those words. My father had loved my mother, had fought for her, despite everything his family had done to keep them apart. And he'd written this note, left it hidden, hoping that one day I'd find it. I looked up at Bram, who was watching me with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. This changes everything," I whispered, barely able to find my voice. He nodded. "I figured it might. I know Fairview's full of rumors, but I thought, well, everyone deserves to know where they come from." There was a name at the bottom of the letter, and I recognized it instantly. Hugo Barnes. I couldn't get out of that house fast enough. Bram, bless him, tried to say something comforting, but I barely heard him. I thanked him quickly and clutched the tin tightly, heading back to my car, heart pounding. My mind was racing. The letter had confirmed everything I'd hoped, and everything I'd feared. My father hadn't been a coward. He'd fought for us. The Lovetts, those smug, self-righteous people, had been lying to keep their twisted sense of honor and control intact. All those years, they'd destroyed my mother's reputation, and mine, all to cover up their own cruelty. I couldn't let it go. Before I knew what I was doing, I drove straight to Hugo Barnes's office. Fairview was so small, I didn't need directions. That same old law office with the weathered sign was right where it had been my whole life. I parked and marched inside, my anger boiling over. The receptionist barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, clearly bored. I leaned in. "Tell Hugo Barnes that Caspian Lovett is here to see him," I said, my voice low but firm. I watched her eyes widen as she took in my name, then my face. She knew exactly who I was. It only took 5 minutes before Hugo himself appeared. He was older than I remembered, his once steely eyes dulled and his gray hair thinning, but he still had that familiar arrogance. He took one look at me and pursed his lips. "Caspian," he said, with the same forced politeness he'd always shown my mom. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Didn't expect me, huh?" I said, feeling a strange satisfaction as his face paled. "Well, I'm here. And we need to talk." He motioned to a side room, clearly uncomfortable. Once inside, I wasted no time. I pulled out the letter and dropped it on the desk between us. "Recognize this?" I asked, my voice sharp. He looked down, and I saw the moment he recognized my father's handwriting. His face went blank. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "This letter was hidden in the house. My dad wrote it to me, in case he didn't make it through everything your precious Lovett family put him through. All those lies. All those years you let my mom be humiliated. You knew the truth the whole time, didn't you?" Hugo cleared his throat, trying to regain some of his composure. "Caspian, this was a complicated situation. Your father, he made choices. Choices that impacted the family." "Choices?" I barked out a laugh. "You mean, he chose love over money. And the family couldn't stand it. So you all smeared my mom's name, made her look like a liar, made our lives hell. All to protect what, the family name? The money?" Hugo flinched, but he didn't answer. The silence in the room was thick. I leaned forward. "I'm done being silent. The people in this town deserve to know who the Lovitts really are. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. Now, let's not do anything rash, Caspian. Your father left things complicated. There's no need to stir up old wounds. No need? I said, my voice icy. You know my mother died believing everyone hated her. You know how much she suffered because of your lies. Hugo shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry. I truly am. But what's done is done. Oh, it's far from done. I picked up the letter, clutching it in my hand like a weapon. See, this letter, and the trust my father left me, have given me some ideas. He blinked. Trust? That's right, I said, barely containing my anger. The one he set up with his own money, hidden from you all. And now, it's mine. Which means I have the resources to make sure everyone in Fairview knows exactly what kind of people the Lovitts are. Now, Caspian, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Hugo stammered, clearly starting to panic. Oh, I think I'm right on time, I said, savoring the look on his face. See, my plan is simple. I'm going to buy the Lovitt house. Not just the house, Hugo, the land, too. And once I own it, I'm going to do a little renovation of my own. Hugo looked horrified. You wouldn't? Wouldn't I? I smiled, letting my anger fuel me. I'm going to tear down every last brick of that house. I'll bulldoze it, sell the scraps. And then I'm going to build a community center in my mother's name, right where that house stood. Hugo's face turned red. This is madness. That house has been in the family for generations. Generations, I said with a sneer. And it'll end with me. I stood up, feeling a strange lightness. It was like every weight I'd carried from that house, that town, had been lifted. I looked down at Hugo, who was shaking now, his hands clasped in his lap. Consider this my way of setting things right. You don't understand what this will do, he muttered, almost to himself. The Lovitts. They have a legacy. A legacy built on lies, I shot back. And it's time for that to end. With that, I turned and left the office, not waiting for another word. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight of my past falling away, replaced by a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Using the trust my father had left me, I bought the Lovitt house outright. I didn't tell anyone my plan at first, not even Bram, who watched with curiosity as the papers were signed and the house was transferred into my name. I hired a demolition crew, and as soon as I got the permits, I made the announcement. The community was shocked. Rumors started flying, just like they had all those years ago, but this time, I wasn't the outcast. I was the one holding all the cards. The Lovitts tried to stop me. They held meetings, they protested, they even tried to take me to court. But it was too late. I owned the property, fair and square. The day the bulldozers rolled in, the entire town gathered, watching as the walls that had once loomed over Fairview's history came crashing down. When it was all over, I stood there, watching the last of the rubble being cleared, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. In the months that followed, I made good on my promise. I built the Elaine Lovitt Community Center, a bright, welcoming place for families, kids, and anyone who needed a safe space. And on the plaque by the entrance, I had inscribed a message, in memory of Elaine Lovitt, who loved without condition and lived with courage. People still talk about the Lovitts in Fairview, but now, they tell a different story. They remember the truth about what happened, about the family that was broken, and about the son who came back to set things right. And every time I walk into that community center, I feel my mother's presence, smiling at me. Finally, we'd found our peace.